Welcome to Immigration Briefing. The content of the briefing includes 2024 is the year of elections and that's a threat to democracy. We fled oppression, not our home, Albania to Australia and back again. Socialism doesn't win American elections. Rishi Sunak admits questioning Rwanda scheme, but denies doubting it would work. The 10% world offers a sliver of hope for 2024. 2024 is the year of elections and that's a threat to democracy. Bloomberg. The world is becoming increasingly unpredictable and unrecognizable, with events such as Brexit, the election of Donald Trump, and the rise of extremist populist parties redefining the political landscape. In 2016, the world was relatively peaceful, with the war on terrorism winding down and China seen as a trading partner. However, the subsequent election of Trump, Russia's election meddling, Brexit, and other geopolitical events have upended the status quo. The upcoming year will see major elections in which extremist parties are on the rise across the globe, leading to concerns about the future of democracy. The struggle between liberal democracies and authoritarian regimes is becoming more apparent, with Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea potentially aligning against the US. The threat of war and the potential weakening of the US's position on the global stage could lead to the world becoming increasingly unstable. Although an optimistic scenario can still be imagined, the chances of the worst-case scenarios occurring have increased significantly in recent years. We fled oppression, not our home, Albania to Australia and back again. Al Jazeera. Almost every evening during the summer of 1975, Badrum Fezolari's father, Feridun, would take him on a walk along the banks of Lake Ohrid. But these were not simply strolls for bonding purposes between a once-distant father who had spent more than a decade behind bars and his teenage son. In reality, the two were on a stealth mission. On and off for 4 years, Feridun had been strolling along the Pogradec lakeside, meticulously monitoring how and when the police patrolled the waters and the surrounding area. He observed how many guards were on duty at any given time, when they would change over, how many lights they would project onto the lake at night, and from what positions. Then, one night in the summer of 1975, after years of watching and months of planning, the family made their move for freedom from the political persecution they had endured for years. Feridun, a 16-year-old Badrum and 14 members of their extended family set out in the dead of night, boarded a wooden boat they had built themselves and made a grueling, 8-hour journey across the lake to what is now North Macedonia in neighboring Yugoslavia, before eventually traveling to Australia where they claimed political asylum and made a new life. Nearly 50 years since that night, Badrum stands at the bar he now owns on the banks of Lake Ohrid and recalls the journey his family took from this same spot, one that turned into a round trip decades later when he decided to return. When the Fezolaris left Albania, the country was in the iron grip of dictator Enver Hoxha, under whom, for more than 40 years, it became one of the most isolated and repressive places in the world. Socialism doesn't win American elections. Foreign policy. A new book titled Where Have All the Democrats Gone? The Soul of the Party in the Age of Extremes by John Judas and Rui Teixeira offers a magical formula for democratic victory in every state. The book argues that the Democratic Party should adopt the policy positions and attitudes favored by the authors, which include socialism stripped of cultural liberalism. The authors claim that adopting these positions would not only lead to electoral victory but would also be good for America. However, the argument made in the book requires some serious acrobatics, as it overlooks the success of Democrats when they embraced free enterprise and common ground with the business community. The authors of the book argue that the Democratic Party has lost working-class voters, particularly white working-class voters, due to their support for desegregation and turned towards neoliberalism. However, the argument is less plausible when considering that non-white working-class voters have not shifted towards the Republican Party in the same way. Additionally, evidence from Western Europe suggests that socialists and social democrats who moved to the center on economic policy saw improved electoral prospects. The second half of the book suggests that Democrats should move to the right on issues such as race, trans rights, immigration, and climate. However, the book offers few concrete policy suggestions in this regard and relies on familiar grievances rather than substantive arguments. Overall, the book fails to make a plausible case for a democratic shift to the author's preferred economic policies or a move to the right on social issues. Rishi Sunak admits questioning Rwanda scheme, but denies doubting it would work. Telegraph. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has admitted that he had doubts about the value for money of the Rwanda deportation scheme when he was Chancellor, but denied that he believed the deterrent would not work. Sunak's doubts about the scheme were reportedly outlined in Downing Street documents from March 2022. However, Sunak has since championed the scheme and used it as a point of difference with the Labour Party. The Rwanda deportation scheme has been stuck in legal gridlock and has not yet been implemented. The Prime Minister is pushing through new legislation to strengthen the scheme's legal protections. The 10% world offers a sliver of hope for 2024. Bloomberg. The 10% world is an optimistic scenario that envisions several positive developments occurring in 2024. It suggests that voters in Western countries, having experienced populism, have come to realize that populist leaders often fail to deliver on their promises and are worse than the leaders they criticize. This could lead to a shift back to centrist politics in countries like Britain, Greece, and Poland. In the US, there is hope for a president who is not named Trump or Biden, which could result in a more functional political system. There is also the possibility of progress in the Middle East, with a change in leadership in Israel and the removal of the current Hamas leadership leading to a potential deal with moderate Palestinians. Lastly, the collapse of one of the world's dictatorships is seen as a 10% possibility, as strongman regimes are often fragile and vulnerable to collapse. While the 10% world is an optimistic scenario, it is acknowledged that these positive developments are less likely to occur than the populist victories of 2016. However, the hope is that in 2024, a surprising and positive year will unfold, with achievements such as America electing its first female president, Trump and Netanyahu facing legal consequences, the US and China repairing their economic relationship, and progress being made in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is recognized that these outcomes are unlikely, but the possibility remains that good things can happen in 2024. Canada must expand eligibility to welcome Palestinians fleeing the worst place on earth. The Toronto Star. The Canadian government's special immigration measures for Palestinians with family in Canada has been criticized for its limitations and exclusion of certain groups. The policy excludes the families of Palestinians already in Canada seeking protection and those on work or study visas that lead to permanent residence. It also requires qualifying families who have already applied for visas to start over and reapply. Additionally, the policy does not address eligibility for fiancés, stepchildren, or nieces and nephews whose parents have been killed. Furthermore, the government quietly announced that only 1,000 applicants would be accepted, leading to a race among Palestinian Canadian families to submit their applications. Critics argue that this limit is arbitrary and reflects an anti-Palestinian bias. They call on Immigration Minister Mark Miller to remove the cap and expand eligibility requirements. Pandemic, war-separate couple finally together in Halifax after immigration struggles. CBC. A couple from Nova Scotia has finally been reunited in Canada after enduring war and the COVID-19 pandemic. Scott Stevenson met Anna Babkova while on vacation in Ukraine in 2019, and they were married in Kiev in 2020. However, their immigration process took 2.5 years, during which time Babkova's visitor visa was denied and she was separated from Stevenson. They were eventually able to reunite and move to Canada after Babkova received her permanent resident visa. The couple's story highlights the challenges faced by individuals trying to immigrate to Canada during times of crisis. This man says moving to Canada was the toughest experience ever with no credit history. So he created an app. CBC. Kingsley Madu, a Nigerian immigrant to Canada, has developed a digital banking app aimed at helping newcomers to the country build a credit history. Madu's app, called Expedia, is specifically designed for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, who do not have a Canadian credit history. The app allows users to rent cars, hotel rooms, homes, and apartments while simultaneously building credit. Madu was inspired to create the app after he and his family arrived in Canada and struggled to book an Uber or rent a hotel room due to their lack of a Canadian credit card. Through Expedia, Madu aims to address the financial struggles faced by many newcomers to Canada, who often lack the credit history required by the banking system. The app has already gained significant momentum, and Madu has brokered an agreement with Equifax to allow users to establish and build credit, access specialized credit and debit cards, and transfer money from other countries into their Expedia accounts. He hopes that the app will make it easier for immigrants to navigate the financial landscape and start their lives in Canada. A small-town stabbing takes on a larger significance for France. New York Times. The traditional village ball 18 minutes outside the city ended in the traditional way, young men fighting outside. What made it different were the flashing knives. 3 young men were rushed to the hospital early in the morning on November 19. 1. The 16-year-old captain of a local rugby team, died en route from a stab wound to his heart. What might have been considered a local tragedy for the residents of Romans-sur-Isère, a working-class city 60 miles south of Lyon, quickly became a national story for one reason: race. The victim was a white teenager from the countryside, while many of the suspects were of North African ancestry and from La Monnaie, a rough city neighborhood notorious for drug dealing. U.S. released more than 2.3 million migrants at border since 2021, data show. Washington Post. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, has released over 2.3 million migrants into the United States at the southern border under the Biden administration, according to a new report. The figures, released by the Department of Homeland Security, highlight the strain on CBP officials who are overwhelmed by the volume of migrants crossing the border. The mass releases have been a last resort when agents do not have the capacity or personnel to process migrants using standard procedures. The number of releases is significantly lower than the 6 million migrants taken into CBP custody during the same period. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas acknowledged the rising numbers and called for increased funding to speed up deportations. The data reveals that over 4 million border crossers have been expelled to Mexico, returned to their home countries, or otherwise removed from the United States over the past 3 years. The report also indicates that families made up the majority of the 2.3 million released by CBP, with around 70% of all detained families being released along the border. Saturday's transactions. Associated Press. The Baltimore Ravens have signed DT Michael Pierce to a 2-year contract extension. The Carolina Panthers have promoted K. Matthew Wright and G. Deontay Brown to the active roster from the practice squad. The Cincinnati Bengals have promoted C.B. Sidney Jones IV and W.R. Stanley Morgan to the active roster from the practice squad. The Cleveland Browns have promoted S. Vincent Gray and K. Riley Patterson to the active roster from the practice squad. The Dallas Cowboys have promoted L.B. Buddy Johnson and S. Sheldrick Redwine to the active roster from the practice squad. The Jacksonville Jaguars have activated W.R. Christian Kirk from injured reserve to the active roster. The Kansas City Chiefs have promoted DT Matt Dickerson and QB Chris Oladokun to the active roster from the practice squad. The Minnesota Vikings have placed W.R. Jalen Naylor on injured reserve and promoted CB's Joejuan Williams and Jalen Williams to the active roster from the practice squad. They have also signed W.R. Lucky Johnson to the active roster from the practice squad. The Washington Commanders have promoted S. Sean Chandler and C.B. Jace Whitaker to the active roster from the practice squad. My daughter got trapped at passport control and missed her flight. Telegraph. Passengers who experienced delays at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam due to a technical issue with the airport's passport eGuts are not entitled to compensation. The Dutch border police has said that there is no compensation available for passengers who miss their flights as a result of such technical failures. However, it is at the discretion of the airline whether to hold the flight for passengers. In this case, EasyJet agreed to refund the cost of the new flights as a goodwill gesture. Voters want a real revolutionary to stop the boats, and it's not Nigel Farage. Telegraph. A significant number of Conservative voters in the UK are open to voting for a party led by Nigel Farage, according to a recent poll. The poll found that 43% of Conservative voters, as well as a third of all voters and a quarter of Labour voters, would consider voting for a Farage-led party. The poll also found that half of the respondents had seen Farage in the reality TV show I'm a Celebrity, and half of that group said they viewed him more favourably as a result. The most commonly associated words with Farage were intelligent and straightforward. Kenya eyes New Year boost to tourism with visa-free system. RFI. Kenya has launched a new visa-free travel system, allowing travelers from all countries to enter the country without a visa. The new system requires travelers to apply for an electronic travel authorization, ETA, online and pay a processing fee of $30. The announcement comes as Kenya aims to boost its tourism industry, which has been heavily impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Last year, the country saw a rise in tourist arrivals, but the numbers were still below pre-pandemic levels. The government hopes that the visa-free travel system will attract more tourists and help the industry recover. Russian move on Ukrainian children sparks outcry. BBC. Ukraine has criticized a decree signed by Russian President Vladimir Putin that allows for the granting of Russian citizenship to Ukrainian children who have been moved to Russia. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry called the decree illegal and a violation of Ukrainian and international laws and children's rights. Russia argues that it is granting citizenship to the children to protect them from harm. The Ukrainian authorities have identified over 19,000 Ukrainian children who have been deported to Russia since the invasion in February 2022. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Putin over Russia's policy of forced child deportations. Well, folks, 2024 is shaping up to be quite a year. We've got major elections, immigration struggles, and even a new visa-free travel system. But let's not forget, it's also a threat to democracy, according to Bloomberg. The rise of extremist parties and the struggle between liberal democracies and authoritarian regimes is causing concern about the future of democracy worldwide. And with countries like Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea potentially aligning against the US, the world could become even more unstable. But hey, let's not lose hope. There's always the 10% world, an optimistic scenario where voters realize the failures of populist leaders and return to centrist politics. We could even see progress in the Middle East and the collapse of a dictatorship. It's a long shot, but hey, stranger things have happened. Speaking of immigration, we've got stories of families fleeing oppression and finally being reunited in Canada. We've also got a Nigerian immigrant who's created an app to help newcomers build credit. And let's not forget the heartbreaking story of a small-town stabbing in France that took on a larger significance due to race. It's a reminder that we still have a long way to go in terms of equality and understanding. So, my friends, what are your thoughts on these stories? Do you see 2024 as a threat to democracy or a year of hope? Let's discuss. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.